guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you, and today we're taking a look at a knife from QSP. This is the Copperhead. If you've seen my initial impression on this, you know that this came from QSP for review. I will add that when I went to find out where you could pick these up and get an idea of price, they weren't widely available. Certainly they seem to have de-emphasized. They used to be primarily an Amazon seller. They seem to have sort of moved away from that and are now going to be more at, standard knife retailers. And it just so happens that White Mountain Knives, who does support the channel, has these in stock. So if you do want to buy one of these, go over to White Mountain Knives, use the discount code SHARPSTUFF, and that actually does help out the channel a little bit. So let's go ahead and get into this now that I've told you where to get it. If you are interested, let me give you a quick rundown on size and weight. Well, actually, let me say QSP has expanded their lineup quite a bit. And, not every single knife that they've come out with I've been totally in love with. In fact, the first QSP knife that they sent me to review, the performance of it was very good, but I wasn't really in love with the design. This one, I really like this design overall. There's a couple little things I wish were different, but I've got to say, yeah, I find this to be a pretty attractive knife. And so to have a knife that, I find very attractive, that is just as functional and just as well put together as the previous QSP is rather encouraging for the brand overall. So let me give you a quick rundown here. This is definitely a larger sized knife, or maybe a heavier duty sized knife. It feels like a big knife in hand. It's not massive, okay? 8 1/4 inches is actually pretty standard, same size as a Para 2, but it is thicker. It has a thicker blade, or I guess a stockier grind on the blade, and is a little thicker in terms of overall dimension in width. So this guy comes in at 8 1/4 overall, 3 1/2 inches on the blade, 4 11/16 on the handle. It weighs in at 4.9 ounces, so just a hair under 5 ounces. And that's a little heavy for a knife of this size, but you know what? For my purposes, and I know there'll be some of you watching who like smaller knives and for whom 5 ounces is crazy. Honestly, I carry knives that weigh, anywhere from 5 to 7 ounces all the time, and to me, it's not really an issue. All right, so if you're one of those guys who, every knife has to be 3 ounces, then this is probably not the best knife for you. But if you're like me and you don't mind carrying something a little heavier, especially if you like larger knives, you're probably used to that anyway, then yeah, 4.9 ounces is not too bad. And in terms of how this carries in pocket, how it goes in and out of pocket, I find it very, very comfortable. I will say this, there's only the single position clip there. So if you're a lefty, you're really limited in terms of options there. Now, I don't know, maybe there's a left-handed version available. So that's where this guy lands at size, weight, and carry. It's not a super duper heavy knife. But it is, a little on the larger side of the EDC weight spectrum anyway. I wouldn't call it a larger knife. I don't really think of larger until we get to 9 1/2 inches. Okay, so moving down here to the blade, I've got to say, by the way, there's quite a bit that I think this knife gets right, and certainly the blade is one of those things. We have fairly decent blade stock here, and with a saber grind, it makes for a very well-balanced blade. It's not too thin, it's not too thick, it's decently thin behind the edge that it slices very well, but it's got enough material coming out here toward the tip that it's pretty confidence inspiring as well. So for an EDC blade, I find that to be really, really good. I don't like, going over the board in either direction. So I don't want a crazy thick blade. I especially don't want a crazy thick edge. But on the other hand, I don't want a super thin blade either. I think most of us with EDC blades, we anticipate, this is the knife I've got with me all the time. So I could be doing who knows what with it. I want to have a little bit of extra strength in that blade. And so, I really like a blade that's ground like this rather than just a super slim, high flat grind, thin blade stock. No, that's too weak and limits me in terms of what I feel comfortable doing with my knife. So really, really like the way this blade is ground. I really, really like the steel on this. 14C28N is a really, really nice budget-ish steel. Okay, so I definitely, you're going to get a lot better performance out of this than, say, your Chinese 8CR13 MOV or 440C or AUS8 or those kind of typical budget knife steels. By the way, this is not a super, super budget knife. I think they're around $50. And 14C28N in that price point is very nice. And so you're going to get really good performance out of that steel. And I think you're going to get really good performance out of this blade. Certainly I have done. I find it slices really well, but it has enough thickness that it's pretty confidence inspiring as well. Moving on to lockup and deployment. This is a stainless steel liner lock. And it's got thumb studs rather than a flipper tab. It is on bearings and it is quite smooth. Let's see, you can see that it does drop shut quite nicely there. There is some question, of course, we always bring this up. Do we want bearings or do we want washers? Well, both have their positives and negatives. I will say this, in this particular knife, because I feel like it's designed to be a little heavier duty, I would have liked to see washers, but that said, the bearings are fine as well. And I do appreciate the smoothness of that action, but I would feel like maybe I'd like the washers a little bit more because, you know, this knife just feels to me like a heavy duty knife that could really do some hard work, but the bearings limit that just a little. You know, not that you still can't do that hard work, but you're just going to have to anticipate, you know, maybe taking this apart and cleaning it up or spraying it down with some WD-40 and forced air and then re-lubricating that pivot because, as we've often talked about, the bearings do introduce that extra area for, you know, potential dirt and grime and stuff to get in there. Otherwise, I really like the action on this. The detent is pretty stiff, and I like a pretty stiff detent, but it may be almost getting to where it's too stiff. I'm trying to there we go, deploy with my left hand, and I'm having a bit of an issue. It's not, other than that time on camera, I haven't found myself failing to deploy this knife when I've wanted to. But if you sit on the couch and just flip this over and over again for 2 hours, yeah, you might get a little uncomfortable because the detent is a little on the stiff side. But to me, you know, the trade-off is nice, which is when it does deploy, when that detent breaks, it flies out of there quite nicely. Thumb studs are pretty comfortable. I didn't find myself slipping off them all the time. I find they are pretty workable. Moving on to construction and ergonomics. How does this thing, you know, how is this handle put together and how comfortable it is it in hand? Well, this is a fairly standard handle construction. We've got a G10 backspacer here. We've got contoured G10 scales over stainless steel liners. The liners have been milled out, and we've got a single position clip. Now, in terms of aesthetics, I really like the overall look of this. The one thing that I think detracts from it is the way that they've done this sort of milling on the bolster area here and on the pommel to sort of make it look like it's got, you know, a bit of a bolster and pommel happening. I feel like that detracts from the knife. It just makes it feel not as classy as it would have had they just left this smooth G10 going all the way to the butt of the knife and all the way to the top of the handle there. I feel like that would have been a little better. All right, it's not the end of the world, but I just would have loved to see them do away with the milling here on that sort of faux-ish bolster, if you will. I do like the little accent there around the pivot. I also like the slightly decorative pivot. Both of those I do think add a little touch of, you know, just sort of extra visual interest to the knife. And so in terms of how it's put together, I'm quite pleased. In terms of how it looks, again, I like the design of this knife. I would have been happier to do without the milling there by the bolster and the pommel. But again, it doesn't ruin the knife for me or anything like that. And then moving on to how this feels in hand, this is where I will say this knife does do really, really well. That slight curve and that slightly thicker handle at 9/16 just makes this very, very nice in hand. No real hot spots in a saber grip. It's great in a reverse grip. It's still great. You know, it's just, you know, however you hold this knife, the only thing maybe there, I can get a little bit of a, you know, if your finger lands right on the top of that clip, maybe there's a bit of a hot spot in a reverse grip, but, you know, then I just readjust so that my finger lands there and I'm totally fine. So very, very comfortable knife in hand, very confidence inspiring. I think they've done a really good job. Like I said with the blade, like I said with the blade they've done a great job balancing cutting power and durability and toughness, and they've really, really done that well here. On the handle, they've done a really good job balancing how grippy it is with how comfortable it is. You know, yeah, you could jimp everything and put really aggressive texturing, and it would be, you know, more grippy, but it becomes a little uncomfortable, or it can become so. In this case, I think they've really struck a nice balance. It's not uncomfortable, but it doesn't. It also doesn't feel like you're going to drop it, or like you have to be worried about it being too slick or anything like that. Just really nicely done in terms of how grippy the knife is and how positive that traction plan is. So let's go ahead and get into some comparisons before I give you sort of my final thoughts on this guy. And of course, you would expect to have some other budget offerings in here. Certainly, I feel like the Rat Model 1 is in a similar vein, a little heavier built, a little larger of a knife, designed to be able to do some hard work, and I think this one does as well. You know, obviously this brings in the comparison between bearings or no bearings, and that's something you're going to have to decide for yourself. For me, in a knife that is in this vein, I would love to see no bearings here, but you know, I don't think it ruins the knife or detracts a whole lot from it. By the way, you know, one of the reasons I feel like you can do bearings is the action on the Rat 1 is really good, and it's using washers. So it is attainable. All right, since we're talking about budget knives and hard work knives, I always love to bring in the Bird Raven 2 here. Again, another knife that is not on bearings, but does have a very nice action. A little thicker on the blade stock here. Again, similar vein here. This is definitely a working knife. Excuse me, guys. Going to bring in the other QSP model I have here. This is the Phoenix. I haven't really had as much time with this knife. I've had them both for the same time, but I haven't put as much use on this. So the review of this one will be coming up. I'll try to pay closer attention to this guy moving forward. You may like this design a lot more. I'm not sure. These two were the two designs out of their lineup this year that I liked the most, which is why you're seeing them here on the camera. Let's get that guy out of the way. Let's grab a couple of sort of budget-ish knives that are on bearings. There is the Tangram Santa Fe. Going to come in quite a bit cheaper. I think this guy runs around $30. Probably more similar in price, but not in purpose, is going to be the Real Steel Ippon. This is a knife that I've been really coming to appreciate, although this does something that, you know, I was just kind of complaining about. Very thin blade stock, very thin grind. Okay, now that has a purpose, and, you know, if you need a knife that is really about slicing power, you know, this is going to be a great option. It does have a nice action, and so that's the main reason I'm comparing these, is because, you know, both of these have really nice smooth actions in a fairly budget-friendly package. I guess we could bring in, yeah, let's throw the Gonzo in here as well. There is the Firebird FH11, and again, doing a similar thing. Stainless steel liner lock on bearings, D2 steel. It is a little cheaper than the QSP. Of course, I have some reservations about Firebird knives because some of their knives are copies, where QSP has done totally their own thing, and I do respect that quite a bit more. Overall, what do I think of this knife? Well, guys, if you've been watching and listening up to this point, I think you know, I've got the blade all marked up during this review, but I think you know I'm pretty impressed. The action on this is nice. The blade on this is nice. It feels really good in hand. It deploys quickly and easily. The action is smooth. Now that's a trade-off you get for having the bearings versus the washers. And as I said, the only changes I would make here, I could use the detent to be just a little softer. And yeah, I think washers in this application would be really nice. That said, the action is dialed in very well by using the bearings. Okay, so do I recommend this? Absolutely. I'm very pleased with this knife. I think QSP has done a great job with this design. Couple little things I'd like to see different, but none of them are the kind of things that really ruin the knife for me. I still really enjoy this and can highly recommend it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to check out White Mountain Knives if you want to buy one of these and use my discount code. We'll talk to you soon.